Welcome to Scoli Sleep Stories. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let the day soften around you, and settle in for a calm documentary made for curious minds. If these stories help you rest, learn, or simply enjoy a quieter part of the day, please consider liking this episode and subscribing to the channel. Now, when you are ready, let us begin. Chapter 1: A Small Green World. In the calm places of the world, where water lingers and light arrives softly, moss begins its slow green work. It may rest on a stone at the edge of a path, making the hard surface look gentle. It may gather at the foot of an old tree, where the bark is dark after rain. It may spread across a fallen log, over a shaded wall, along the lip of a stream, or between the weathered tiles of a roof. Often it is so small and so close to the ground that people pass by without noticing it. Yet when we pause and look closely, moss becomes a world of its own. A patch of moss can look like velvet from above. It may be smooth and low, like a green carpet laid over soil. It may rise in rounded cushions, soft and springy, holding its shape against stone. It may form tiny tufts, each one no taller than a fingertip. Some mosses spread in feathery patterns, with delicate branches that look almost like miniature ferns. Others stand upright in little forests of fine stems, crowded together in patient green company. If you lean closer, the surface changes. What seemed like one simple patch becomes a micro-landscape. A micro-landscape is a tiny landscape, small enough to fit beneath a hand, but rich with shape and texture. There are little ridges, hollows, shaded places, and bright places. Dew gathers between fine leaves. Grains of sand rest like boulders. A fallen needle may lie across the moss like a log across a woodland floor. Moss lives close to the earth. It does not lift itself high into the air like a tree, or open wide petals like a garden flower. Instead, it follows the surfaces it finds. It softens the edge of rock. It traces the rough pattern of bark. It settles into cracks in old walls where dust and moisture have collected. It spreads slowly over forest soil, near roots and fallen leaves, where the air stays cool. Many mosses are most visible in places that are moist, shaded, and relatively undisturbed. A forest after rain is one of their gentle kingdoms. The trunks are darkened with water. The leaf litter gives off the deep, earthy scent of damp soil. Drops fall now and then from branches overhead, landing softly among green mats below. In the dim light beneath the trees, moss may seem to glow with its own calm brightness, emerald and olive and yellow-green. Along a stream bank, moss may grow where the air is kept fresh by moving water. Mist can settle there in the morning, resting on stones and roots. Held in place, as if the patch were a woven cloth. The stream passes nearby with a low, steady sound, and the moss remains beside it, receiving the coolness of the place. In wet meadows and bogs, moss may become part of a much larger softness. There the ground can be spongy, and the colors can shift from green into gold, rust, and pale yellow. Some bog mosses hold remarkable amounts of water, making the land feel tender and saturated. In such places, moss is not just a decoration on the surface. It helps shape the feeling of the whole landscape. And yet moss is not only a plant of shade in damp forests. Some mosses live in bright, open places. Some survive on exposed rocks, in alpine heights where winds are cool and strong. Some grow in polar regions, where the season of growth is brief. Others are found in deserts, wading through dry times and becoming active again when moisture returns. The mosses of the world are many, and they have learned many quiet ways of living. There are thousands of kinds of moss, each suited to its own habitat. A habitat is simply the place where a living thing naturally grows or lives. For one moss, a good habitat might be the shaded side of a boulder near a stream. For another, it might be the bark of a tree in a cloudy mountain forest. For another, it might be a patch of thin soil in the tundra, where many plants remain small and low. Because moss often grows where shade and moisture meet. People have sometimes said that moss always grows on the north side of trees, but this is not really so. Moss grows where conditions are right for it. In one place, that may be the north side. In another, it may be the south side, or all around the trunk, or only near the base where rainwater gathers. Moss is guided less by compass direction than by water, light, surface, and shelter. Moss is also sometimes confused with other living things that share its name. Reindeer moss, for example, is not a true moss. It is a lichen, a different kind of life made from a partnership between a fungus and a photosynthetic partner such as an alga. Spanish moss is not a moss either. It is a flowering plant related to bromeliads, hanging in pale strands from trees in warm regions. Club mosses, despite their name, are also not true mosses. They are vascular plants with a different kind of structure. True moss is a small green plant without flowers or seeds. It belongs to a larger group called bryophytes. That word may sound large, but its meaning is gentle enough. Bryophytes are simple land plants, and the group includes mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. These plants have ancient roots in the story of life on land, though moss itself does not have true roots in the way a tree or a rosebush does. For now, it is enough simply to know that moss is a real plant, small and green, living by its own old pattern. A moss patch may look still, but it is not lifeless. It changes with weather. After a dry spell, some mosses become pale and curled, their tiny leaves drawn inward. They may look brittle, almost asleep in the daylight. Then rain arrives. Water darkens the stone, beads along the bark, and gathers in every small hollow. Slowly the moss softens. Its color deepens. The curled leaves open. The cushion becomes plump again, bright and tender, as though the whole little landscape has taken a quiet breath. This slow response is part of moss's charm. It does not hurry. It waits in the thin places where moisture returns. It uses what comes: mist, dew, fog, rain, the spray of a stream, and the cool air under trees. In this way, moss seems to belong to the pauses of the world. It thrives where time is allowed to gather. On an old wall, moss may grow between stones that have stood for many years. The wall may warm in the afternoon and cool again toward evening. Dust settles. Rain rinses the surface. A green thread begins. Over time, that thread becomes a tuft, and the tuft becomes a patch. The wall remains a wall, but now it carries a living softness. On a rooftop, moss may appear as muted green after wet weather. In some places, people enjoy its aged and natural look. In others, too much moss on a roof can hold moisture and become a matter for maintenance. Moss is not always harmful and not always harmless. Like many living things, its meaning depends on where it grows, how much of it there is, and what kind of surface supports it. On tree bark, moss often grows as a quiet passenger. It uses the bark as a surface, not as food. It does not usually harm the tree. Instead, it follows the grooves and ridges, making tiny green pathways up the trunk. After rain, the bark smells cool and earthy, and the moss appears in fine emerald threads, as if the tree were wearing a soft covering of weather and time. A forest floor rich with moss can feel hushed. Footsteps, if they come, seem to belong carefully there. Fern shadows move across green mats. Fallen leaves rest on the surface, some fresh and golden, others dark and returning to soil. Water slips from needles and branches, then disappears into the moss below. In the low light, this small plant gathers the feeling of the whole forest: damp, patient, shaded, alive. To notice moss is to practice seeing slowly. At first there is only a green patch. Then there are cushions and carpets, tufts and feathery sprays. Then there are tiny leaves, droplets of dew, grains of soil, and narrow spaces where even smaller lives may move. The closer we look, the larger the little world becomes. And so we begin here, with moss as it first appears to us, a soft green presence on stone, bark, soil, and water's edge. Familiar, but often overlooked. Ancient, but still fresh after rain. Small, but able to make a landscape in miniature. In the next quiet turning of our attention, we will lean a little closer. We will look beyond the green cushion and ask what moss really is, how it is built, and how such a delicate plant can live so widely across the world. Chapter 2. What Moss Really Is. If we lean closer to a patch of moss, the green surface begins to change. From a distance, it may look like velvet spread over stone, or a soft cushion resting at the base of a tree. It may seem almost like a single piece of living fabric, but close up, moss becomes a tiny woodland. There are upright stems standing side by side. There are small leaf-like pieces arranged along them, sometimes like green scales, sometimes like feathers, sometimes like delicate lace. A moss patch is not just a green stain on the world. It is made of many small plants, each one simple in form, yet beautifully suited to its life. Mosses are plants, but they are not quite like the plants we may first imagine. They are not like roses, with petals opening in the sun. They are not like grasses, making seeds at the tips of slender stalks. They are not like trees, building trunks of wood year after year. Mosses are small, non-flowering land plants. Non-flowering simply means that they do not make blossoms. They belong to a group of plants called bryophytes. A bryophyte is a simple kind of land plant that does not have the same deep roots, woody stems, or complex inner plumbing as many larger plants. This group includes mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. Liverworts often grow as flat green sheets or small leafy forms, and hornworts may have slender horn-like structures. Mosses are their own branch of this green family, with their familiar cushions, carpets, tufts, and feathery mats. There are many kinds of moss in the world. Scientists often cite roughly 12,000 or more described species, though the exact number can change as mosses are studied and classified in new ways. Some are bright emerald, some are olive or yellow-green, some grow in tight rounded cushions, while others spread in soft carpets. Some stand upright, like tiny groves, some branch out like little plumes. Yet for all their variety, true mosses share a few quiet traits. They do not have flowers, they do not have seeds, they do not have wood, and they do not have true roots. This may seem surprising at first. Many familiar plants reach down into the soil, with roots that gather water and minerals. A carrot is a thick root. A tree may have roots spreading wide and deep. A bean seedling sends a root downward before its stem reaches upward. Roots hold plants in place, but they also serve as pathways, drawing water from the ground. Moss has something different. At the base of many moss plants are fine threads called rhizoids. A rhizoid is not a true root. It is more like a tiny anchor. Rhizoids help moss cling to bark, soil, rock, old wood, or other surfaces. They may look root-like because they are thin and threaded, but they do not work like the roots of a tree or a garden flower. They do not reach deeply into the ground to draw up water in the same way. Imagine a moss plant resting close against a stone. Its rhizoids hold it gently in place, like small fingers touching the surface. Above them, the little stem-like body rises. Along it are leaf-like pieces, often very thin and tender. In many mosses, these tiny leaves are only one cell layer thick, though this can vary from species to species. A cell is one of the tiny living units that make up plants and animals, so a leaf only one cell thick is almost unimaginably delicate, like the thinnest green veil. Because the leaves are so thin, moss can take in moisture and dissolved minerals directly through much of its surface. It does not need the same kind of root system that larger plants rely on. Its whole body lives close to air, rain, mist, and dampness. Moss also lacks the complex vascular tissue found in trees, ferns, grasses, and flowering plants. Vascular tissue is the plant's inner plumbing. In larger plants, it carries water upward and food downward through specialized tubes. It allows a tree to lift water from the soil to leaves high in the air. It allows a sunflower to stand tall and move water through its stem. Moss does not have that kind of true vascular system. Some mosses do have simple conducting cells inside them, which can help move water or nutrients short distances. But these are not the same as the strong, complex systems found in woody trunks or flowering stems. This is one reason moss stays small and low. It lives close to the surface, where water can reach it directly. This smallness is not a failure. It is simply another way of being a plant. A moss plant does not need height to enter the light. It can use the soft brightness that filters through leaves. It can grow on a shaded stone, a fallen log, or the damp edge of a path. It does not need flowers to continue its kind. It does not need seeds tucked inside fruit or held in cones. Instead, moss makes spores. A spore is a tiny reproductive cell that can grow into a new plant if it lands in a suitable place. Spores are much smaller and simpler than seeds. A seed usually contains a young plant embryo and a supply of stored food. A spore is more like a tiny beginning, light enough to be carried by air, water, or small movements in the world around it. In many mosses, spores are made in small capsules held above the green moss on slender stalks. We will return to these capsules later, when we follow the life cycle of moss more closely. For now, it is enough to know that mosses reproduce by spores rather than seeds. Their way is old, delicate, and well suited to a life lived near damp surfaces. The green mossy part we usually notice has a scientific name too. It is called the gametophyte. This word can be divided gently. Gamete means a reproductive cell, such as an egg or sperm. Phyte means plant. So the gametophyte is the plant generation that produces these reproductive cells. In mosses, the gametophyte is the main green body, the part that looks like moss to us. It is the soft carpet on the forest floor. It is the little cushion on the stone. It is the fine feathered patch spreading across damp bark. In many other plants, the part we see most often belongs to a different generation of the life cycle. But in moss, the green gametophyte is the familiar, leafy presence. If we look again at a moss cushion, we may imagine all of this without needing to name every part. The tiny leaf-like structures overlap and catch the light. The stem-like structures stand together in quiet crowds. The rhizoids hold to the surface below. There is no bark, no wood, no blossom, no seed. There is only a small green body, open to moisture, light, and air. A moss patch can feel simple, but simple does not mean unimportant. Its form is carefully matched to its way of life. Without deep roots, it stays near the places where water gathers. Without wood, it remains low and flexible. Without flowers, it follows the older path of spores. It lets its whole surface meet the dampness of the world. This is why moss can seem so intimate with the places it grows. It lies close to stone and bark. It follows the curve of a root. It softens the edge of a wall. Its body is not separated from its surroundings by height or hardness. It is near everything: rain, shade, air, soil, leaf litter, and the slow cooling of evening. And so to understand moss, we begin not with a tall plant reaching upward, but with a small plant resting close. A small plant without true roots, a small plant without flowers or seeds, a small plant whose thin green leaves and fine anchoring threads make a world at the scale of droplets. And if moss does not reach deeply into the soil for water, then its life must depend on another, quieter way of receiving moisture. It waits for rain, mist, dew, fog, and the damp breath of the air around it. Its next secret is not hidden underground, but spreads softly across its surface, where water arrives and the green world opens again. Chapter 3. Life Without Roots. After rain, a patch of moss can seem to change its whole expression. What was pale and still a little while before becomes deep green again. A cushion on stone darkens from silvered olive to emerald. A mat along a path grows softer, fuller, and more open. Tiny leaf-like tips, once curled close to their stems, loosen and spread. Water rests in the narrow spaces between them, held there gently, as if the moss has remembered how to breathe. Many familiar garden plants live with their roots hidden in soil. A daisy, an oak seedling, or a blade of grass sends roots downward, searching for water and dissolved minerals. Those roots draw moisture from the ground and pass it upward through the plant's inner plumbing. Moss lives differently. Moss has no true roots. Instead, it has fine anchoring threads called rhizoids. A rhizoid is not a root, though it may look root-like when seen under a lens. It is more like a tiny holdfast, helping the moss cling to bark, stone, soil, or old wood. Rhizoids keep the moss in place through rain, wind, and the slow settling of leaves. They fasten the small green plant to its chosen surface, but they do not draw water from deep underground in the way roots do. For moss, water arrives from the world around it. It may come as rain falling through forest branches. It may come as mist along a shaded ravine. It may come as fog gathering on a coastal rock, or dew forming quietly before morning. It may come from a stream, splashing softly against stones and sending fine droplets into the air. It may come from humid air that keeps the moss from drying too quickly. When this moisture touches moss, the plant can absorb it directly through its outer surfaces. Its leaf-like structures, its stem-like structures, and its delicate outer tissues all take part. Water does not need to travel through deep roots first. It can settle on the moss, move along the tiny leaves, and enter the plant close to where it lands. This is one reason moss seems so closely tied to the weather. A shower passes over and moss responds. Fog thickens and moss holds the cool dampness. Dew gathers in tiny hollows between the stems, shining for a while like small beads of glass. Even the shape of a moss patch helps it keep water near. In a cushion, many little stems stand close together, making sheltered spaces where droplets can rest. In a carpet, overlapping leaves slow the movement of water across the surface. In a feathery moss, branching stems can catch moisture from the air and from dripping branches above. The water may carry dissolved minerals with it. These are tiny amounts of nutrients washed from dust, bark, rock, soil, or decaying leaves. Moss can take in some of these dissolved materials through its surface along with the water. Because of this open way of absorbing, moss is strongly connected to its surroundings. Rain, air, and light all play a part in how moss grows, and in turn, moss is a part of the great cycle of moisture and life. And the surface beneath it all helps shape its life. There is a scientific word often used for mosses and other plants with this kind of relationship to water: poikilohydric. It is a long word, but its meaning is simple. A poikilohydric plant has water content that changes with the wetness of its surroundings. When the air and surface are damp, the plant is damp. When the world around it dries, the plant may dry too. For moss, this is not always a disaster. Many mosses can enter an inactive state when they become dry. Their tiny leaves may curl inward. Their stems may shrink slightly. Their color may fade from bright green to yellow-green, gray-green, or brownish olive. A dry moss cushion can look brittle, as if it has paused and withdrawn. During this dry time, many of the plant's living processes slow down. Photosynthesis, the process by which green plants use light to make food, may stop or nearly stop. The moss waits with very little movement. It is not growing in the usual way. It is not taking in water. It is simply enduring the dry interval as best it can. A light rain begins. A morning fog settles. Dew forms along the edges of leaves and stones. The moss takes in the moisture again through its surface. Its tissues rehydrate, meaning they fill with water once more. Curled leaves may open. A dull patch may brighten. The cushion may become springy and plump again. In many mosses, photosynthesis can begin again after rehydration. Light falls through the trees or across a rock face, and the green cells of the moss resume their ply at work. They use light, water, and carbon dioxide from the air to make sugars, which are the plant's food. This return can seem gentle and almost immediate to the eye, especially after rain darkens a pale patch into a rich green one. The ability to survive drying and recover when water returns is called desiccation tolerance. Desiccation means drying out. Tolerance means the ability to endure something. So desiccation tolerance is the ability to endure drying and then recover afterward. But mosses are not all the same. Some species are very tolerant of dry conditions. They may live on exposed rocks, sunny walls, tree bark, tundra, or even in deserts where water comes only briefly. These mosses may dry many times and revive many times, following the rhythm of rare rain or morning dew. Other mosses need more constant moisture. They grow in wet forests, bogs, stream edges, seepage areas, or places where the air stays humid for long periods. These mosses may not survive long, harsh droughts. Their relationship with water is still close, but it is a softer kind of dependence, suited to places where dampness lingers. So it is best not to imagine moss as one single kind of plant with one single talent. Mosses are many. Some wait through dryness with remarkable patience. Some remain near steady water. Some grow in shade, while others can live in brighter places if they have the right adaptations. All need light for photosynthesis, even those well suited to dim forest floors. In shade, they use the gentle filtered light that slips between leaves and branches. In open places, they must balance light with moisture, heat, and drying air. On a forest bank, the rhythm can be very slow and calm. Rain falls through the canopy and gathers in the moss. Drops slip from needles and twigs, landing without much sound. Water rests between close stems. The moss darkens. Its small leaves open to the damp air. Later, the rain passes. The clouds thin. A faint brightness returns. The surface begins to dry. The upper tips of the moss may lose their shine. A few leaves curl inward. The green becomes softer and paler. Then evening comes, and the air cools. Dew gathers again in the tiny hollows. The moss receives what the night offers. Not much is needed at once. A thin film of water can matter greatly in this small world. Along a stream, moss may live with a steadier sound of water nearby. It clings to stones where splashes reach it. Its rhizoids hold it to the rock, while droplets from the moving stream keep its surface damp. There the moss is part of the stream's edge, neither fully in the current nor far from it. It lives in the meeting place of stone, air, and water. In a ravine, mist may thread between shaded walls. The air feels cool and close. Moss grows on fallen logs, on damp soil, and in the cracks of rock. Its green is deep in the dimness. It does not need bright sunlight, but it does need enough light to make food. In such places the balance is gentle. Shade protects moisture, and filtered light sustains the moss. On an old wall, a different rhythm may unfold. The stone warms in sun, then cools at night. Rainwater runs down the surface, carrying faint traces of minerals. Moss gathers in small rough places where water lingers just a little longer. In dry weather, it may shrink and pale. After a shower, it opens again, a small green map returning to view. This way of life is close to the surface of the world. Moss does not reach far down. It does not lift itself high on woody stems. It accepts water where it arrives, on bark, on stone, on soil, in mist, in dew, and in the soft splash beside a stream. There is something deeply patient in this arrangement. Moss does not command water. It waits for it. It receives it directly. It changes with it. And this daily rhythm of drying and re-wetting reaches far beyond a single morning after rain. The close relationship between moss and moisture is part of a very old story, one that stretches back through forests, across ancient wetlands, and into the deep past of life on land. Long before roots grew deep and trees rose tall, small green plants were learning how to live with sunlight, stone, air, and water. Moss still carries a quiet echo of that ancient beginning, held in every drop that gathers among its tiny leaves. Chapter 4: The Ancient History of Moss. Long before there were forests with tall trunks and spreading branches, long before flowers opened in meadows, and long before grasses moved in waves beneath the wind, the land was a quieter place. There were stones, bare and weathered. There were low shores where water met earth. There were damp places where thin films of life could cling to rock and mud. The sky arched above a world still becoming green. To imagine the ancient history of moss, it helps to move slowly, not back by a few centuries or even a few thousand years, but back through deep time. Deep time is the long time scale of Earth's history, so vast that it is often easier to picture it as layers settling gently, one upon another like fine sediment at the bottom of a still pond. Mosses belong to an ancient lineage of land plants. A lineage is a long family line through evolution, the gradual change of living things over many generations. Modern moss is not the same as the earliest plants that touched the land. It has changed, diversified, and adapted over immense stretches of time. Yet moss still carries something of that early story in its small green form. The earliest land plants began spreading onto land hundreds of millions of years ago. Scientists study this distant past through fossils, which are preserved traces of ancient life. Sometimes a fossil is a leaf, a stem, or the outline of a whole organism, but with very small and delicate plants, the record is often incomplete. Soft tissues do not always last. Fine stems and tiny leaves may decay before they can be preserved. Spores, however, are different. Spores are tiny reproductive cells, and their outer walls can be tough enough to leave traces in ancient rocks. Because of this, spores often preserve better than whole fragile plants. Fossil evidence suggests that bryophyte-like plants, or at least their spores, existed by the Ordovician period, roughly 470 million years ago. The Ordovician period itself lasted from about 485 to 444 million years ago. That is a calm and distant number. It belongs to a world unlike our own, yet connected to it. If we could stand on an ancient shoreline beneath a quiet sky, we might not see anything that looked like a modern garden or forest. There would be no flowering shrubs, no broad leaves overhead, no birdsong in branches, but near damp ground along the edges of water, small green life may have been beginning its patient work. The move from water to land was not simple. Life in water is supported on all sides. Water helps prevent drying. It holds bodies up. It carries reproductive cells from place to place. On land, early plants faced many new conditions. They had to endure drying out when the air became less moist. They had to meet sunlight more directly. They had to hold themselves against gravity, the steady pull that draws all things downward. They had to grow where deep soil had not yet formed, and they had to find ways to reproduce away from open water, or at least with only a thin film of moisture to help them. These challenges shaped the early greening of the land. It was not one quick event, but a long unfolding. Rock weathered slowly. Microbes, fungi, lichens, and early plants all played roles in changing surfaces and helping early soils develop. Water seeped into cracks, minerals loosened, fine particles gathered, organic matter began to accumulate in small pockets and sheltered hollows. Over time, the land became more welcoming to green life. Mosses and their relatives, the bryophytes, still show a close relationship with water. Bryophytes are simple land plants that include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. They do not have the same deep roots or complex plumbing systems as trees and many flowering plants. Their lives remain closely tied to damp air, rain, dew, mist, and thin films of water. This closeness to water is especially important during reproduction. In mosses, the sperm cells need moisture to move toward the egg. Even today, in a small green patch on a shaded stone or forest floor, an ancient pattern continues. A film of water after rain can become a path for renewal. There is something gentle in this. Moss does not rise high above the world to escape its limits. It stays low. It lives near the surface of bark, soil, rock, or fallen wood. It receives moisture when it comes. It slows its activity when conditions are dry. It responds to the world around it in small, careful ways. Across millions upon millions of years, plant life on Earth became more varied. Some lineages grew tall. Some developed true roots and wood. Some made seeds, then flowers and fruits. Forests rose, wetlands spread, deserts formed, mountains lifted, ice came and went. The continents themselves shifted slowly across the globe. And through all of this, moss lineages continued. Modern mosses are not unchanged relics. They are living plants shaped by evolution, just as all living things are. There are thousands of moss species today, growing in forests, bogs, tundra, alpine slopes, stream banks, deserts, rooftops, and shaded walls. Some form compact cushions, some spread in carpets, some branch like tiny feathers, some stand upright like miniature groves. Their ancient roots do not mean they are old in the sense of being finished or left behind. Instead, they are old in the sense of being deeply connected. They belong to one of the early branches of land plant life, a branch that found a quiet and lasting way to inhabit the earth. A patch of moss can make time feel different. Seen from above, it may look like a soft green stain on stone, but seen closely, it becomes a landscape. Tiny stems stand together, fine leaves overlap like scales. Droplets of water rest in hollows too small for the eye to notice at first. A slow world is gathered there, shaped by moisture and light. And behind that small world is a longer one. The damp stone beneath the moss may have formed in ancient heat or pressure. The soil around it may contain particles worn from mountains, carried by water, loosened by frost, and softened by roots. The moss itself belongs to a lineage that reaches far back toward the early green plants that made a life on land. This does not make moss a museum piece. It is alive now. It grows when conditions allow. It dries and rests in some seasons. It greens again with rain. It shelters tiny organisms. It releases spores. It takes part in the present moment with the same quiet attention it has always seemed to invite. In this way, moss can feel like a living echo. An echo is not the original sound, but it carries something of it forward. Moss is not the first land plant preserved unchanged. It is a modern, evolving plant with a deep ancestry. Yet, when it spreads over damp soil or clings to shaded stone, it reminds us of the old closeness between green life and water, between plant and surface, between patience and survival. The history of moss is not written in broad leaves or cowering trunks. It is written in small forms, in spores held in ancient rock, in delicate plants that rarely fossilized whole, and in living mats that continue to thrive where conditions are right. It is written in the way moss waits for rain. It is written in the way a pale, dry cushion can deepen to emerald after moisture returns. It is written in the way a green film can soften a hard edge of stone. And it is written in the continuing life of bryophytes, those small plants that remain close to the earth and close to water. After traveling so far back in time, we can return gently to the moss before us now, a cushion on a rock, a mat at the base of a tree, a feathery patch along a stream. It carries its long history without hurry. It does not need to announce its age. And across deep time, moss has continued through a delicate method of renewal, not with flowers, not with seeds, but with tiny spores formed in small capsules and released into the moving air. Chapter 5. How Moss Reproduces. If you look closely at a patch of moss in the right season, you may see something rising from the green. Above the soft cushion, above the tiny leaf-like stems, there may be fine stalks standing upright in the still air. At the tip of each stalk is a small capsule, sometimes brown, sometimes golden, sometimes green at first and darker with age. They look a little like tiny lantern posts in a miniature forest. The green moss below is the part most people notice. It is the soft mat on a stone, the feathery carpet on a log, the low green covering along a shaded path. In the moss life cycle, this green leafy plant is called the gametophyte. The word may sound large, but its meaning is simple. It is the generation of the moss that makes reproductive cells. In mosses, the gametophyte is the main visible plant. It is the little green world that holds dew, catches mist, and brightens after rain. The stalk and capsule above it are another generation, called the sporophyte. This part makes spores. A spore is a tiny reproductive cell that can grow into a new plant if it lands in a suitable place. Mosses reproduce with spores, not seeds. Spores and seeds are not the same. A seed usually contains a young plant embryo with stored food and a protective coat. A spore is simpler and much smaller. It is more like a small beginning, waiting for the right conditions, a little moisture, a little light, and a surface where life can take hold. Inside the capsule at the tip of the sporophyte stalk, spores are formed quietly. The capsule is like a small case, holding the next generation until the time is right. It may stand straight, or nod slightly, as if listening to the dampness of the air. In a forest after rain, the capsules may glisten with moisture. In drier air, they may slowly open. The sporophyte does not live independently like a separate plant. It remains attached to the green gametophyte below. In mosses, the spore-making stalk and capsule depend on the leafy moss for nourishment, so the two generations are joined, the green moss below, steady and soft, and the fine capsule-bearing stalk above, lifted just high enough to let spores meet the moving air. When the capsule matures, it releases spores. They are dust-like, often too small to see one by one without magnification. A slight breeze may carry them. A passing current of air may lift them from the capsule and move them across the surface of a log, a stone, a bank of soil, or the rough bark of a tree. Most spores do not become new moss plants. They must land in a place that suits them. Too dry, too dark, too exposed, or too disturbed, and they may not grow. But when a spore settles into a damp crevice, or onto a shaded patch of soil, or among the fibers of old wood, it may begin. This cycle is patient. It does not ask for flowers. It does not scatter seeds with bright shells or sweet pulp. Moss follows an older, quieter path. It uses water, air, and time. Water is especially important in the moss life cycle. For sexual reproduction, moss sperm need a thin film of water to swim to eggs. This water may come from rain, dew, mist, or moisture held between the small leaves and stems. In that tiny wet pathway, smaller than a raindrop, movement can happen. This is one reason moss is so closely linked with damp places. Not all mosses need constant wetness, and many can endure drying for a time, but for this part of the life cycle, liquid water matters. A film of water is enough. It does not need to be a stream or a pool. It may be only a shining layer across the surface of a moss cushion after a soft shower. After fertilization, the sporophyte begins to grow from the gametophyte. A slender stalk rises. A capsule forms at its tip. Slowly, within that capsule, spores develop. The cycle continues, as quietly as morning moisture gathering on a shaded stone. Some moss capsules have a remarkable little structure at the opening. Around the mouth of the capsule are tiny tooth-like parts called peristome teeth. These teeth are not teeth for biting, of course. They are delicate structures that help control how spores are released. In some mosses, peristome teeth respond to humidity, which means the dampness of the air. When the air is moist, they may close or shift. When the air becomes drier, they may open in a way that lets spores escape gradually. This slow release can help spores leave at times when the air is moving and dry enough to carry them. It is a very small mechanism, but finely made. A capsule does not need to send all its spores at once. It can release them little by little, over time. The miniature forest sends its next generation into the breeze in quiet portions. Capsules vary widely among mosses. Some are long and narrow, some are rounded. Some sit upright, and others bend downward. Some stalks are tall compared with the moss below, while others are short and close to the cushion. In one patch, the capsules may look like tiny brown beads, in another, like small pointed urns. Their shapes are part of the great variety of moss life. There are thousands of moss species in the world, and not all reproduce in exactly the same way or with the same emphasis. Some often produce capsules, others may spread more commonly by pieces of the plant itself. This brings us to another quiet method of moss reproduction: asexual reproduction. Asexual means making new plants without eggs and sperm. Moss can do this in several ways. A small fragment of moss may break away. It may be carried by water, by wind, by the foot of an animal, or by the slow crumbling of a log. If that fragment lands where conditions are suitable, it may continue growing. A bit of stem, a small cluster of leaves, or a piece of a cushion can become the beginning of a new patch. Some mosses also make tiny detachable structures called gemmae or propagules. These are small pieces made for spreading. They can separate from the parent plant and grow into new moss. Like spores, they need a welcoming place. They need enough moisture, enough light, and a surface where they can settle. In this way, moss does not rely on only one path. It may send spores into the air from capsules, it may spread by fragments, it may produce small propagules. Each method is modest, but together they give moss many chances to continue. A moss cushion may seem still, but it is not without change. Beneath its calm surface, new shoots form, old stems fade, spores mature, fragments take hold, capsules rise and empty, rain returns, and the green deepens. Seen from far away, it may be only a soft patch on a rock. Seen closely, it is a life cycle unfolding in miniature. There is something gentle in the way moss lifts its capsules above the green. The stalks are slender, yet they are enough. The capsules are small, yet they hold multitudes. The spores are almost weightless, yet some will become new green mats in the hollows of bark, the seams of stone, and the shaded edges of forest soil. When the air dries slightly after morning rain, a capsule may open. The peristome teeth may shift. A few spores may drift away, floating beyond the little forest that made them. Some will settle where nothing comes of them. Some will rest in places too bright or too dry. But a few may find a damp surface, a quiet crack, a thin layer of soil, or the softened side of a fallen branch. There in time, another green beginning may appear. And once those new moss plants grow into cushions, carpets, or tufts, they do more than continue their own kind. They become part of a wider living world. Their mats hold moisture. Their tiny spaces shelter small creatures. Their surfaces catch fallen leaves, dust, and droplets from the trees above. From the life of one capsule and its dust-like spores, the story opens outward again, into the forest, where moss is not alone, but woven gently into a whole community of quiet lives. Chapter 6: Moss in the Forest. In the forest, moss often lives where the world is low, shaded, and close to the earth. It spreads over soil in soft green mats. It gathers on the sides of rotting logs. It settles into the cracks of stone and follows the curve of exposed roots. Sometimes it climbs the bark of trees, not to take food from them, but simply to use the bark as a place to rest and grow. In this way, moss is often an epiphyte, a plant that lives on another plant without being a parasite. After rain, the forest floor becomes especially gentle. Drops fall from high branches and dark needles. They land softly on moss instead of striking bare soil. A fallen leaf may rest on a mossy patch like a small roof. Fern shadows move slowly across the green. Above, the wind may pass through the crowns of trees, but below, among the moss stems, the air is still and damp. Moss may look quiet from above, but it is part of a living forest system. An ecosystem is a community of living things and the place around them. Trees, fungi, insects, soil, water, stones, and moss all belong to this community. Each one changes the others in small ways. A moss mat helps hold moisture near the ground. Its tiny leaves and stems create many small spaces where water can rest. These damp spaces form a microhabitat, which means a very small habitat. To a person walking by, it may be only a green patch on a log. To a creature smaller than a grain of rice, it can be a shaded woodland of stems, hollows, droplets, and shelter. Within this miniature forest, many small lives move quietly. Springtails may be there. A springtail is a tiny soil animal, often pale or dark, with a special forked part that lets it jump when disturbed. It moves among the moss stems, grazing on bits of fungus, algae, or decaying matter. There may be mites too, small round-bodied creatures that live in soil, leaf litter, and moss. Some feed on fungi, some feed on plant material, some feed on other tiny animals. There may be nematodes, which are very small worm-like animals. There may be rotifers, tiny water-loving creatures that often live in films of moisture. And sometimes in the damp spaces of moss, there are tardigrades. Tardigrades are microscopic animals, often called water bears, because of their rounded bodies and slow, bear-like movement when seen under a microscope. These creatures are not usually visible to the unaided eye. Their world is tucked inside the moss, among droplets and threads and tiny bits of leaf. They live at the pace of moisture. When the moss is damp, many of them become active. When it dries, some can pause, curl, or wait in ways suited to their kind. Moss mats also shelter communities even smaller than these. Bacteria, fungi, algae, protozoa, and other microscopic life may live on and around the moss. Protozoa are tiny single-celled organisms, often found where water is present. Bacteria and fungi help break down dead material. Algae use light to make food, much as green plants do. Together, these hidden communities help with decomposition, the slow breaking down of once living matter. This is part of nutrient cycling. Nutrient cycling means the movement of useful materials through living things, soil, water, and air. A needle falls from a pine branch. A leaf fragment settles into moss. Dust gathers after a dry day. Tiny pieces of bark, pollen, and decomposing plant material become caught in the green mat. Over time, fungi, bacteria, and small animals help break these pieces down. Nutrients are released little by little. They may return to the soil, to roots, to new leaves, and to the forest again. Moss does not do this work alone. No part of the forest does. But moss helps hold the small pieces in place. It slows them down. It keeps them from washing away too quickly. It gives moisture and shelter to the organisms that help turn fragments back into usable forest matter. A mossy log shows this quiet process well. A tree falls. At first its wood is firm. Rain darkens it. Fungi enter it. Beetles and other small animals make passages through it. The bark loosens. Moss begins to grow across the surface, especially where shade and moisture are steady. Years pass. The log softens. Moss covers it in cushions and feathery patches. Ferns may lean above it. Seedlings may find a place to begin in its damp crevices. The log slowly becomes less like a fallen tree and more like the forest floor. Moss helps soften that passage. It holds water against the wood. It catches falling needles and leaf dust. It shelters small lives. It does not hurry the change. It simply grows there, season after season, while the forest recycles its own fallen body into new ground. Moss can also help protect soil. When rain falls on bare earth, each drop can strike the surface and loosen tiny particles. On a slope, water may carry those particles downhill. This is erosion, the wearing away and movement of soil or rock. A moss covering can soften the impact of raindrops. It can reduce small-scale erosion by holding soil and slowing the movement of water near the surface. This does not mean moss can stop all erosion everywhere. Forest slopes, storms, soil types, roots, and the wider landscape all matter. But at the small scale of a bank, a path edge, or the base of a tree, moss can be a gentle cover. It holds the surface together in fine threads and cushions. It keeps the soil a little cooler and damper. It helps make the forest floor less exposed. Moss can also be a seedbed for some plants. A seedbed is the place where a seed lands and begins to grow. In some forests, a damp mossy surface can protect seeds from drying out. It can cradle tiny seedlings above cold or compacted soil. A young seedling may begin on moss, especially on a decaying log where moisture is steady and the surface is soft. But the story is balanced. Thick moss can make germination harder for other seeds. Germination is the beginning of growth from a seed. If a moss layer is very deep, a small seed may not reach the soil. It may not receive the right light, warmth, or contact with minerals. In some places, moss helps young plants begin. In others, it may slow them. The forest is not made of simple rules. It is made of relationships, changing with species, weather, shade, and time. On tree bark, moss has another quiet role. It may grow along the rough side of a trunk. In ridges where water lingers after rain, it may form small green islands on branches in humid forests. Most moss growing on bark is not harming the tree. It does not sink roots into the wood to take food. Its rhizoids, the fine threads that anchor it, hold it in place. The moss uses the bark as a surface, while the tree continues its own life. In very damp forests, trunks and branches may carry whole gardens of mosses, liverworts, lichens, and ferns. A branch can seem wrapped in green. Water beads along these coverings, and the air feels cool around them. In tropical cloud forests, where mist often moves through the trees, moss may grow thickly above the ground. In colder forests, it may form broad carpets over stones, logs, and soil. Birds may gather moss for nests in some habitats. A bit of moss can make a nest softer or help shape it. Small mammals may also use moss as nesting material where it is available. They take from the green mat and carry it to hollows, burrows, or sheltered places. In this way, moss becomes part of warmth and shelter for other creatures, not by design, but by being soft, common, and close at hand. Still, much of moss's forest life remains where it began, low, green, and patient. A drop slips from a fir needle and lands in a moss cushion. It does not splash far. It sinks into the spaces between tiny stems. Nearby, a springtail moves and is still. A thread of fungus grows through a dark crumb of leaf. A seed rests on a damp surface, waiting for the right conditions. The old log beneath the moss softens a little more. The forest above may seem larger and more important, with trunks rising high and branches crossing the sky. But the small green world below is also part of the forest's balance. It holds moisture. It shelters lives. It catches fragments. It helps soil remain in place. It gives the woodland floor its texture after rain. And beneath the sheltering trees, moss continues to gather what the forest gives it. A little shade, a little leaf fall, a little mineral dust, and drop after drop of water. In the next part of its secret life, we can follow that water more closely into the moss itself, where moisture is held in green tissues and narrow spaces, slowly kept and slowly released. Chapter 7: Moss and Water. After rain, moss seems to become more fully itself. A pale green cushion on a stone darkens slowly, as though color is returning from within. Tiny leaves loosen and spread. Fine stems, once curled close, grow plumper with moisture. A raindrop lands, rests for a moment, then disappears into the soft surface, drawn into the small spaces between leaf and stem. Moss does not hold water in one simple way. It can absorb moisture into its tissues, and it can also keep water in the narrow spaces between its many tiny parts. A moss mat is not a single smooth sheet. It is more like a very small woodland, with upright stems, overlapping leaves, and hidden hollows. Water gathers there quietly. It clings to surfaces. It beads in green pockets. It moves slowly through the mat instead of rushing away at once. In this way, moss can act like a sponge at a small scale. This does not mean moss controls whole rivers or prevents floods by itself. Water moving across a landscape is shaped by many things: soil, slope, trees, wetlands, weather, and the paths that streams have made over time. But close to the ground, where raindrops meet earth, moss can make a real difference. It can slow surface runoff, which is water flowing over the land. It can soften the impact of falling rain, reducing the splash that loosens tiny grains of soil. This helps lessen erosion, the wearing away and carrying off of soil or rock. A mossy patch also helps keep the air just above it damp. This small pocket of conditions is called a microclimate, meaning the climate of a very small place. Beneath leaves, beside roots, or along a shaded bank, moss can hold coolness and moisture near the soil surface. The ground below may stay damper for longer. The air between the stems may remain humid even after the rain has passed. Not all mosses hold water in the same way. Some grow in tight cushions that shed part of the rain and keep moisture tucked inside. Some form loose carpets where water threads between branching stems. Some live in wet places and can remain soaked for long periods. Others live in dry, exposed habitats where they may dry out and wait until the next rain. Their water-holding capacity depends on their shape, their species, and the place where they grow. Still, the connection between moss and water is one of the quiet patterns of the natural world. Rain falls, moss receives it. The green surface changes, not suddenly, but gently, becoming vivid and soft. If we follow that water farther, From a forest path toward a wetter landscape, we may come to the edge of a bog. A bog is a kind of wetland, often cool, open, and quiet, with water that is acidic and low in nutrients. The ground may not feel like ordinary ground. It may tremble softly beneath careful footsteps, as if the land itself is floating on stored water and plant matter. In many bogs, one of the most important mosses is sphagnum. Sphagnum is not just one species, but a group of mosses. It can appear in shades of pale green, yellow-green, gold, rust, rose, and crimson. In a wet bog, water shines between its strands. A cool breath rises from the ground. The surface is made of living moss above, and below it, layer upon layer of older plant material, slowly changing in the wetness. Sphagnum is especially good at holding water because of special empty cells called hyaline cells. These cells are like tiny, hollow chambers. They do not carry out photosynthesis in the way green cells do. Instead, they help store water. Because of these water-holding cells, sphagnum can soak up and retain large amounts of moisture compared with its own dry weight. As sphagnum grows, it helps shape the bog around it. It holds water close. It can make conditions more acidic. It also helps slow decomposition, which is the natural breaking down of dead plant material. In a bog, waterlogged conditions mean there is little oxygen in the lower layers. Acidity and coolness can slow the work of microbes, the tiny living things that usually help dead leaves and stems decay. So the remains of plants do not vanish quickly, they build up. Over long periods of time, partly decomposed plant material in wetlands can become peat. Peat is not living moss. It is a deep, dark, compressed accumulation of old plant matter, often including sphagnum and other wetland plants. It forms slowly, sometimes over thousands of years, in places where water keeps decay from finishing its usual work. This slow forming of peat has meaning far beyond the bog itself. Plants take in carbon dioxide from the air as they grow. They use carbon to build their tissues. When plants die and decay completely, much of that carbon returns to the air. But in peatlands, decay is slowed. Carbon can remain stored in the wet ground for a very long time. Peatlands cover only a small portion of Earth's land surface, often cited at around 3%. Yet they store a very large amount of soil carbon, often estimated at about 1/3 of the world's soil carbon. These numbers may vary somewhat between studies, but the main idea is steady and clear. Peatlands are small in area compared with forests, grasslands, and deserts, yet they are immense carbon stores. A carbon store is a place where carbon is held instead of being released quickly into the air. In an intact peatland, water is part of the keeping. The wetness protects the peat, layer after layer, like a quiet archive beneath the moss. But peatlands can be harmed when they are drained, burned, mined for peat, or stressed by climate change. When peat dries, the old plant material is exposed to more oxygen. It can begin to break down faster. Fires can burn into dry peat. Damaged peatlands may release carbon dioxide and methane, both gases that affect Earth's climate. These facts are important, but they can be held gently. A bog is not only a carbon store, it is also a living place, sphagnum glowing in soft colors, pools reflecting a pale sky, and slow growth continuing under the open air. To care for such places is to care for water, soil, plants, and time together. It is also helpful to know that peat moss sold for gardening usually refers not to living moss but to harvested, partly decomposed sphagnum peat. This material has often been used because it holds water well. Yet peat extraction can damage peatland habitats, and the question of sustainable use is not simple. Some gardeners now choose alternatives, while others look carefully at where materials come from. Like many human choices, it asks for attention and care. Returning from the bog edge to the forest path, the smaller scene feels connected to the larger one. A patch of moss on a stone, a green mat beneath spruce needles, a sphagnum bog holding centuries of rain and plant matter. Each shows a different part of the same quiet relationship. Moss receives water without hurry. It holds what it can in tiny leaves, in glassy cells, in shaded hollows, and in the spaces between stems. It slows the drop, softens the splash, cools the soil, and keeps a little dampness near the lives that depend on it. In the hush after rainfall, when the trunks are dark and the stones smell clean, moss seems to gather the weather close to the ground. And where moss holds water and softens the earth, people have often paused. They have noticed its usefulness, its texture, its patience, and its calm green presence. From wet forests and bogs, the story of moss moves naturally toward human hands and human gardens. where this small plant has been used, studied, tended, and quietly admired. Chapter 8: Moss in Human Life. Where moss grows near human paths, it often changes the feeling of a place. A stone step edged with green seems older and softer. A wall touched with moss after rain appears less separate from the earth around it. Between paving stones in the shaded corner of a garden, or along the base of a quiet tree, moss brings a low, gentle texture. It does not rise up like a shrub or open like a flower. It stays close to the surface, spreading slowly, holding moisture, and gathering light in its small leaves. People have noticed this quiet presence for a very long time. Across different cultures and landscapes, mosses have been used in practical ways. In some places, people gathered moss for padding or bedding, especially where soft plant materials were needed and available. Moss could be tucked into gaps between logs or stones as insulation, a material that helps keep warmth in and cold out. It could be used as packing around fragile objects, or as an absorbent layer, because many mosses can soak up and hold water. These uses depended on local species, local knowledge, and the needs of a particular place. They were not the same everywhere. A moss that worked well in one damp forest might not be present in another region. A dry hillside moss might not have the same softness or absorbency as a moss from a bog. Human relationships with moss have always been shaped by climate, tradition, and careful observation. One of the best-known historical uses involved sphagnum, a group of mosses common in bogs and wet peatlands. Sphagnum has a remarkable ability to hold water. Its structure includes special empty cells that act like tiny reservoirs, making it unusually absorbent. During World War I, sphagnum moss was used in wound dressings in some medical settings. It was valued because it could soak up liquid and because it is naturally acidic. That acidity may inhibit some microbial growth, meaning it may make conditions less favorable for certain tiny organisms. Still, it is important to be clear and gentle with this history. Sphagnum was useful in its time, especially when supplies were limited, but it is not a substitute for modern sterile medicine. Sterile means free from living germs. Today, medical materials are prepared and tested in careful ways. Moss belongs to its own world of wetlands and green growth, even though people have sometimes found wise uses for it. There is another side to human appreciation of moss, one that is less about need and more about beauty. In gardens, moss can create a feeling of stillness. It softens the edges of stone. It gives the ground a continuous green surface, low and calm. It can make a small space feel like a forest floor, even within a courtyard or near a house. In suitable climates, some people cultivate moss lawns, especially in shaded, moist places where grasses may struggle. Others use moss in naturalistic garden design, allowing it to grow around rocks, along paths, or beneath trees. But a moss garden is not maintenance-free. Moss grows slowly, and it has its own preferences. It needs the right local climate, enough moisture, appropriate shade or filtered light, and a suitable substrate. A substrate is the surface or material a plant grows on, such as soil, stone, bark, or a prepared garden base. Moss also needs protection from too much foot traffic. Repeated stepping can damage the delicate stems and leaves. Weeds may need to be removed by hand, quietly and patiently, so they do not overtake the low green mat. A moss garden asks for attention rather than force. It invites a gardener to notice where water lingers after rain, where light falls softly, where the ground stays cool, and where green can spread without being hurried. In Japan, moss gardens have become especially admired for their atmosphere of calm and age. These gardens are often associated with shade, moisture, still stones, careful paths, and seasonal change. Moss may grow around rocks, beneath maples, beside quiet water, or along pathways meant to be walked slowly. The garden does not need bright flowers to feel complete. Its beauty may come from many green tones: emerald, olive, yellow-green, deep jade, and the silvered green that appears in filtered light. A famous example is Saihoji in Kyoto, often called the Moss Temple. Its garden is known for the quiet impression its moss creates together with stones, trees, and paths. After rain, the colors deepen. In drier times, some moss may pale or curl slightly. In autumn, fallen leaves rest on the green like small boats. In winter, the garden becomes more subdued but not empty. Such places remind us that moss is not simply decoration, it is alive, responsive, and particular. It asks for the conditions that suit it. Moss also appears in smaller human-made worlds. In terrariums, which are planted worlds inside glass, moss can make a miniature forest floor. A tiny cushion of green beneath a small fern or stone can suggest a whole landscape in a jar. But living moss in a terrarium still needs light, moisture, and airflow. Too much sealed dampness can encourage mold. Too little light can weaken the moss. Even in glass, the small green world must breathe. In bonsai displays, moss may be placed over the soil surface, helping create the impression of an old tree rooted in a quiet landscape. In floral arrangements, moss may be used for texture or to cover the base of a design. Sometimes, however, what is sold as moss is not living moss at all. It may be preserved moss, treated so it keeps its color and softness but no longer grows. Sometimes products called moss may actually be lichen, algae, or other plant material. Reindeer moss, for example, is not a true moss, but a lichen, a partnership between a fungus and a photosynthetic organism. These distinctions do not take away from the beauty of such materials, they simply help us understand what we are seeing. In modern design, moss has found its way onto green roofs and living walls, though its success depends greatly on the setting. A green roof is a roof planted with living vegetation. Mosses can be part of these systems in some climates and designs, especially where shallow growth, low height, and water-holding ability are useful. On old roofs and walls, moss may also arrive on its own, carried by spores and encouraged by shade and dampness. Sometimes this is harmless, or even valued for its soft appearance. A stone wall touched with muted green after rain can feel beautifully settled into its surroundings. But on some roofs, heavy moss growth may trap moisture or interfere with drainage, contributing to maintenance problems. The effect depends on the roof material, the climate, and how much moss is present. Like many relationships between people and nature, it is not simply good or bad. It asks for context. There is also care to consider when moss is gathered. Wild harvesting can damage ecosystems if it is careless or done on a large scale. A moss mat may look simple from above, but it can shelter tiny animals, hold moisture, and protect soil. Removing it may take away more than a green surface. Responsible use means knowing where moss comes from, whether it can regrow, and whether it would be better to cultivate it rather than collect it from the wild. The more one learns about moss, the less it seems like a background detail. It has served as padding, insulation, absorbent material, garden surface, miniature landscape, and quiet companion to stone. It has been useful and beautiful, ordinary and carefully tended. It has entered human life not through grandeur, but through closeness, tucked between logs, pressed into a dressing, settled beside a path, growing in a glass terrarium, or resting around the base of a small tree in a bonsai pot. And after all these uses, all these gardens and walls and green containers, moss remains itself. It still responds to moisture. It still needs light. It still grows slowly over surfaces that suit it. It still holds dew in its fine leaves and deepens in color after rain. So we can leave the gardens now, and the old walls, and the glass vessels with their tiny forests. We can return to a single patch of moss in evening light, low on a stone at the edge of a path. The day cools, the green surface darkens slightly, a little moisture gathers in the air, and the moss, neither hurried nor still in the way of stone, continues its quiet life close to the earth. Chapter 9. The Quiet Lesson of Moss. As evening settles over a forest path, the smallest things begin to gather the last light. A stone beside the trail, once bare and gray, now wears a soft green covering. It is not a thick blanket, not a sudden growth, but a patient layer made over time. Tiny stems stand close together. Fine leaves catch the dimming glow. In the spaces between them, the air is cooler and more humid than the open air just above. This is one of the quiet gifts of moss. It makes a little world where there was only a surface. Stone, bark, soil, fallen wood, all may become places where moss can live, if there is enough light, enough moisture, and a little shelter from harsh conditions. A shallow crack in rock may hold a thread of dampness. A shaded hollow at the base of a tree may keep dew a little longer. A rotting log may offer a soft, uneven surface where spores or fragments can settle. Moss often begins with such small opportunities. It does not need a deep field of soil. It does not send roots downward like a tree or a garden flower. Instead, it lives close to what it touches. Its fine anchoring threads, called rhizoids, hold it in place. Its tiny leaf-like surfaces take in water when rain, mist, fog, or dew arrives. When the surroundings are dry, many mosses can slow down and wait. Some curl inward, some fade to a paler green or brownish shade. Then when moisture returns, many can revive, becoming fuller, brighter, and active again. This ability suggests resilience, the capacity to recover after difficulty. In moss, resilience is not endless, and it is not the same for every species. Some mosses are very tolerant of drying, others need steadier moisture, and may not survive long droughts. Individual moss plants can die, as all living things do. Yet under favorable conditions, a moss colony, a group growing together, may persist for many years, sometimes for a very long time, though its exact age can be hard to know. A moss patch is often not one single plant, or even one single age. It may be a gathering of many stems, many generations, and sometimes more than one species. What looks like one smooth green cushion may be a small community. Newer growth may rest beside older growth. Minute animals may move within it. Fungi, bacteria, algae, and tiny bits of leaf litter may share its spaces. The patch is simple to the eye, but not empty. It is easy for people to look at moss and feel that it teaches patience. This is a human reflection, not a scientific fact that moss itself intends. Moss does not plan to be wise. It does not grow slowly in order to instruct us. Yet its real way of living can still invite a gentle thought. It grows by small increments. It uses what is near. It responds when conditions change. It rests when it must. It returns when it can. These are not dramatic actions, but they are living actions. Moss is not passive. When water arrives, its cells take it in. When light filters through leaves or clouds, its green tissues use that light for photosynthesis, the process by which plants make food. When the season changes, growth may quicken or slow. When air dries, certain mosses fold and wait. When air becomes moist again, their tiny leaves may open into brightness. From far away, a mossy stone may seem still. Up close, it is responsive. The evening air cools a little more. A small breeze passes through the trees above, stirring leaves and needles. Beneath them, the moss remains low and close to the ground. Drops from an earlier rain still cling to its surface. The forest floor gives off the scent of damp earth, leaf litter, and softened wood. A fallen branch, dark with age, has become edged in green. A root has gathered a tuft of moss in the crease where bark meets soil. On the side of a stone, a cushion has rounded itself to the shape of the rock beneath. Over years, moss can soften the appearance of hard places. It does not make stone cease to be stone. It does not erase bark or wood. It simply lives along their surfaces, tracing them in green. A wall, a boulder, a roof tile, a stream bank, each may hold a little sign of moisture and time. Moss is often overlooked because it is small. Yet smallness is not the same as insignificance. In forests, moss can help hold moisture near the ground. It can shelter springtails, mites, nematodes, tardigrades, and other tiny lives. It can trap bits of organic matter and create a gentle microhabitat, a very small place with its own conditions. In bogs, certain mosses such as sphagnum help shape entire wetlands, holding water and contributing over long periods to peat, a store of carbon-rich plant material. Again and again, moss shows how much can happen at a small scale. A thin film of water may be enough to change its color. A narrow crevice may become a home. A shaded surface may become a green mat. A quiet, damp place may hold more life than it first appears to hold. As daylight fades, the green of the moss becomes less bright and more silvery. The separate leaves blur into softness. The small stems are no longer easy to count. Moonlight, if it comes, will touch only the upper tips, leaving the deeper spaces in shadow. In those spaces, the air stays cool. Moisture lingers. Slowly, as the night deepens, dew may begin to form. Dew is quieter than rain. On moss it may collect bead by bead, resting among the fine leaves and stems. A patch that seemed dry in the afternoon may hold a little coolness by night. Not enough for every species in every place, but enough sometimes to soften the edges of dryness. The moss does not hurry toward morning. It remains where it is, on stone, on bark, on soil, on fallen wood. It holds its place with threads too small for most eyes to see. It shares its surface with the forest, with the air, with the passing seasons. It waits through shade and weather, not as a thing forgotten, but as a living part of the landscape. And beneath ordinary footsteps, beneath the broad world of trunks and branches and sky, there is still that small green world, a world of cushions and carpets, of damp hollows and sign cracks, of slow growth and quiet return, of tiny leaves holding the coolness of night. In the darkness, dew gathers, the stone grows dim, the moss rests in its own green stillness, responsive and patient, part of the forest's deep and gentle continuity. Morning waits quietly beyond the trees.